letter to the Thessalonians today. And of course, you have your Thessalonian flags on the centerpieces, and you see that they have the coin on them. That's the ancient Thessalonian flag, and the coins that are on it are there. Now, you may eat those, by the way. I couldn't find Thessalonian coins, so the closest I could get is what you have there. They just don't make them. I don't know. So I just want to tell you, in case you don't know where Thessalonica is, I put up a map here. We'll also be going over it through the class. But just to tell you about it, it still is called that today. They spell it, depends, with a K sometimes, and sometimes with the CA. It's also known as Salonica, and it's the second largest city in Greece. So if you get an idea where that is. It's the capital of the geographic region of Greek Macedonia. Its honorific title is literally co-capital, and it stands as a reference to its historical status as co-reigning city of the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire alongside Constantinople. So that gives you a little background. According to a census, they have in their municipality about 322,000. This is 2011. While the urban area, that has about 800,000, making it the fifth largest and most populated city in the Balkans, and the second most populated city that is not a capital after Istanbul. The metropolitan area extends over an area of about 562 square miles. That's like 1,400 kilometers. And its population in 2011 reached a total of 1,104,460 inhabitants. So it's second major economic, industrial, commercial, and political center of Greece. And it is a major transportation hub for the rest of southeastern Europe. Its commercial port is also of great importance for Greece and the southeastern European hinterland. And it's also renowned for its festivals. The most populated city in the Balkans and the second most populated city that's not a capital after Istanbul. So if that gives you a little bit, and I have more information about it. And also I wanted to mention that today we are in the time of Shabbat, the festival of Shabbat. And you ever heard of that, the Jewish festival? It's also Pentecost. So Pentecost, you know, is the Greek name given to the 50th day after Passover, which is the Christian tradition of commemorate as the day that the Holy Spirit empowered the disciples, and it's also the birth of our church. Now, in the Jewish tradition, Pentecost has been in existence since, anybody know when? Since when? Since God gave Moses the law. Okay? And that's, you can read about in Exodus 34:22, Leviticus 23:15 through like 21. And it's considered to mark the exact day that Israel was given the Torah. And you remember what the Torah is, the first 5 books of our Old Testament. Now, the Feast of Weeks, called Shabbat in Hebrew, began as an agricultural festival, thanking God for the first fruits of the harvest. And in biblical times, Jewish men were required to travel to Jerusalem and offer their sacrifices at the temple. So remember, we hear about Jesus making the trek to the temple. After the temple's destruction, of course, what happened? The scattered Jewish communities shifted the holiday's focus to celebrating the gift of the Torah. And it's a 2-day festival. And during that time, there's no work allowed. On the first evening, it is customary for families to stay up all night long studying the Torah. So you think this homework's bad. Try doing it all night long. And then it's followed by a sunrise service. So when you're completely wiped out, then it's time for the service. So in Jerusalem, this service takes place, can you guess where? At the Western Wall, of course, at the Western Wall with thousands of people. And the 10 Commandments are recited, and the Jewish people publicly affirm their dedication to obeying God. So now the festival of Shabbat is also known as the festival of the giving of the Torah, or the festival of the harvest, or the festival of the first fruits, which is Bikurim. Bikurim is the first fruits. That's a little bit about that background. I've got so much stuff I want to tell you, but it takes up too much of the class. Anyways, yeah, we'll have to work some of these things into the other classes. So let's get started now with a little bit about Paul in Macedonia. Now that you have kind of an idea where that is, we're going to have the introduction first just to get us started on this epistle. And now Paul the Apostle, of course, established numerous Christian communities within Asia Minor and Europe, but none were more dear to him than the Macedonian churches that were founded in Philippi and Thessalonica. Certainly, these churches became his consolation, causing him the least concern. Remember how every time he'd set up a church and he'd leave, it seemed like all heck would break loose? Well, these guys were like, you think about having a good tenant, the one that you never have to worry about. This is all the more remarkable when you consider how little time he actually spent with them. Paul spent in the formation of these two communities very little time. So he was in there working with them and on to the next guys, and all the other guys are giving him all the trouble. You remember all the stuff that happened with the Galatians, how the Judaizers came in there and were trying to get them back, circumcising themselves to be under the law, as if rejecting Christ's redemption through the cross, thinking that circumcision was going to get them salvation, and a whole bunch of other stuff. They were straddling the Judaism-Christianity line. So perhaps Paul found in Macedonia a fine quality of people, a type of people that had a natural character that was well suited to spiritual formation. And sometimes when you're just beaten down, I suppose, God would grace his evangelizers with this, and every once in a while he'd just give them a bunch of people that would embrace him and grow in the faith. And I always think of this group that way. You guys are just like that. And I can imagine if Paul walked into this parish and found this bunch, we'd be just like those guys, the Thessalonians. I just know it. So of all his converts, note, only from the Macedonians did he permit financial contributions toward his support. He wouldn't even allow anybody to support him. Paul had no fear that these Christians were going to go and misinterpret that, which can easily happen. Because anybody who wanted to find anything to poke at Paul, when you start talking about the pocketbook, that's one way to really take somebody down. Say he's in it for the money, or he's doing this or that. He knew that they weren't going to be presumptuous in their relationship with him. And this fact points to something really neat about them, that they were very spiritually mature. He could ask for things, he could trust that they weren't going to make a big to-do about it. That's how much he trusted this bunch. Macedonia was the land that bred some famous guy we've all heard of, Alexander, the conqueror of space and peoples, a terrestrial lord that they say wept over lack of worlds to conquer. There just wasn't enough out there. He couldn't be big enough. You see how power is? It's this unending drive that is never fulfilled, as is all sin. But in truth, his time ran out in the face of unknown, unconquered worlds. Well, here we are today, and we weren't conquered by him. Bummer. So this mortal Macedonian dreamed that only a Christ with a capital C could accomplish. Alexander beheld a Catholic vision, small c, as in universal vision, and believed himself to be sent by heaven to unite, to pacify, and to reconcile the whole world. And he had the idea that he would marry the East to the West. So this guy had big plans. Alexander initially used force of arms by which to unite people. But the only force that really unites is what? Love. The power of love. And the realization of this dream had to be left to another conqueror, because you can do all you want, but you're never really going to get where you want unless you're locked onto God. You're just spinning your wheels in the mud. Jesus of Nazareth, his time too ran out prematurely on earth, very young, 33 years old as we believe. But unlike Alexander the Great, his power did not run out, did it? And here we sit 2,000 years later, because he was working with the power of love. Paul's coming to Macedonia was, in part, a realization of this dream, but it was an entirely higher level than the one envisioned by Alexander. Paul arrived in Macedonia around the year 51 AD, after a successful ministry in Antioch and southern Galatia. And led by the wind of the Spirit, Paul came to Alexandrian Troas, Troas, in Asia Minor, in the company of his traveling companions. And I'm sure you've heard of Silas and Timothy. And by the way, do you know anything about Asia Minor, where that is?
Turkey.
Well, yes, modern-day Turkey. Why is it called Minor? Does anybody have a guess? Very interesting. It's related to our Christian religion. Yeah. It's a geographic region. It's east of Greece, and it's in the southwestern part of Asia, which would be considered modern-day Turkey. So that's right, Betty. Now, Asia Minor, from the Greek Mikra Asia, or Little Asia, was a term coined by a Christian historian by the name of Orosius. Orosius. This was about 400 AD when he wrote a book. And in this book, he differentiated the main Asia from a certain region that he dubbed Little Asia or Asia Minor. And guess what happened in this region? This is where Paul evangelized. And that is what he coined the term as being Asia Minor, because this was Paul's territory where the Christian faith had been evangelized. And to this day, we call it Asia Minor because of a Christian evangelization and this historian that wrote about it. The we narrative in Acts now begins. Luke the evangelist probably came along and joined Paul in Troas. So he was prevented by the Spirit from going north to Bithynia. Paul and his companions waited in Troas for some sign of God's will in this manner. They said, okay, well, we're going to have to find which way to go. Sometimes you have to have more prayer, you have to wait, God's testing your patience, whatever it is, but he had other plans for them. So one night, while lost in prayer, Paul received a vision in which he beheld a Macedonian that was saying to him, come over to Macedonia and help us, as you see in the picture there. And this you can read about in Acts 16:9. Now Paul, recognizing this as a divine direction, came with his companions and immediately set out for Macedonia to bring the gospel to Europe. So here we go. Sailing from Troas, they crossed the Aegean Sea and came to the port city of Neapolis. And they moved on from there to Philippi, which Luke describes as being, quote, a leading city in the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. You have to remember how much the Roman Empire, how much it covered in that time. And Luke tells us, quote, we spent some time in that city. So that's Acts 16:12. A Roman colony implied an area that was colonized and peopled by, say, retired Roman soldiers, officials, and their families. So it would have been a place that was fiercely loyal to all that is Roman. And we can see here, let's take a little look at this map. Okay, now this is actually, this path here is Paul's first journey, second journey, not his first journey. This was a better map. It kind of showed all the stuff. That's what the red lines are. But just to give you an idea, here's Tarsus, Paul of Tarsus, Saul of Tarsus. That's where he's from. Here's Jerusalem, Caesarea, Damascus. Remember the road to Damascus when he met with the risen Jesus. Okay, now, he's heading over here. Now, here's Troas. All right, here's Neapolis, Philippi, Thessalonica. And notice that this is in Macedonia. Okay? Now, this is Asia. This map doesn't quite say it right because this area here is Asia Minor. Okay? But it just said Asia on there. Now, okay, so those arrows kind of show you where those two places are. And notice here, remember from the Revelation class? Here's the churches, the 7 churches. See, we've got Pergamum, Smyrna, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea, Ephesus. So here's all those churches. They're the ones that have the little crosses on it, are the ones that he established, the ones mentioned in Revelation. So hopefully that gives you an idea of, here's Paphos and the Aegean Sea. So that gives you kind of an idea of where we are. So if you want maps of that, I can make you copies. And I think in the Galatians class, I made maps for everybody. So if you have those, it should be similar to what you're seeing here. And there's also a map here that has all these different locations and empires throughout different times in history. So if anybody wants to take a look at that, feel free. Just give it back to me because I need it. I need it for all this stuff. We're going all over the place with these maps. Paul is a busy guy. Let's talk about being persecuted in Philippi. Now, Paul was, as I mentioned, a cosmopolitan apostle. He prudently chose cities of the Roman Empire in which to establish the Christian church. And by establishing the church in strategic geographical centers, he sought to ensure its rapid expansion. Like the Lord tells us, to be strategic, to be prudent, to think things out. He doesn't expect us to just sit there and wait for a checklist. I get kind of sucked into that way of thinking sometimes. But no, we've got to use our brains and our talents. Luke mentions the result of Paul's locating in Ephesus and holding daily discussions in the public hall at Tyrannus. And he says, this continued for 2 years, with the result that all the inhabitants of the province of Asia, Jews and Greeks alike, heard the word of the Lord in Acts 19:10. And think about the strategic locations today. If you were out evangelizing and if you're doing Paul's job, where are you going to go? What's strategic today? Las Vegas. That's too funny. Anybody have a guess? The media. The media. Yeah. Internet. Internet's great. Instantaneous. You can get it everywhere. And there's that intrigue. Even those countries where the governments do everything possible to eliminate contact with their people for fear of them getting Western ideals in their head or maybe Christianity. Oh my gosh. Well, try as they might, they can't keep it down, can they? And it's anonymous, and you can do things in a way that you can really get the message out there. So I am sure that the Lord gave us all this technology in these recent years for a very good reason, that the word is going to get out to the four corners of the earth. And that's exactly what's happening. Because as the population keeps increasing, you couldn't have a Paul running around to all the places keeping up with all the population. You could have so many evangelizers out there you'd never keep up. There's more babies born every second than you could possibly do anything. Enter technology. So don't ever think this is an accident that the Lord has given us this. So from Acts, we now know that Paul customarily would begin evangelizing in the Jewish synagogues. And synagogue is basically the word for a meeting place, a gathering place. Attending the Sabbath service, he sought an opportunity to address a congregation that consisted of both Jews and Gentiles, because some had converted to Judaism, but all were favorable to Judaism. So they weren't any anti-Semitic Gentiles if they were attending the services. So this was a wonderful place to start, and for more than one reason. But I'll tell you about the other reason later. It was among this latter group, the Gentiles, that he made the deepest impression and drew the most numerous conversions. So here we go. They embraced Judaism, so maybe they were more open-minded to begin with. But when they heard the word, the gospel from Paul, they were sopping that up. They said, wow, this really makes sense now. This ties the whole thing together. And enter all these Gentiles. So this naturally antagonized people, right? It antagonized those Jews who had rejected the gospel message. Remember? The Gentiles that rejected it, it was foolishness. And to the Jews that rejected it, it was scandal. Remember that passage? So those Jews at times went around and would incite persecutions against Paul and his new converts. So the members of the early church were not only believers, but they were more than that. They were actually proselytizers. They recognized that they had a moral responsibility toward the salvation of others, as we do today. And they could not, even if they tried, remain silent. That spirit was driving people. Even in the face of social unpopularity and the fear of perhaps getting imprisoned, as it eventually came to be the case, they acknowledged their vocation to be a witness for Jesus Christ in the world. And from Luke's account, there appears to be, actually now in the city of Philippi, there's no synagogue there. So here he is in this place, but there's probably very few Jews there for one reason or another if they don't have a synagogue. And this actually comes as a surprise in the fact that the city was a very important commercial center. So it suggests that either there's a strong anti-Semitic sentiment within the area, or this may have been a reaction to Claudius's edict banishing all the Jews from Rome. So that could probably be the reason. So there probably weren't enough male Jews to constitute a synagogue, and you have to have 12. You had to have 12 to have a synagogue. And even today, you have to have a Cohen present to bring out the Torah, and they have all these rules about, and there has to be a quorum of the males, and I don't know all the rules about it, but they needed 12 then to have a synagogue. However, some Jewish prayer services were being held out along the riverbank, as you'll see in that picture there. So Luke relates, quote, on the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the bank of the river, where we thought there would be a place of prayer. So they went out there thinking, okay, there's going to be a lot of people out there. Maybe we can go evangelize to them. That's Acts 16:13. So there, by the riverside, Paul made his very first convert in Europe. Anybody know who that is? The lady Lydia. Lydia. She was a rich merchant from Thyatira in Asia Minor. And Lydia offered Paul and his companions the hospitality of her home with these words. She said, if you are convinced that I believe in the Lord, come and stay at my house. Acts 16:15. And so they accepted her hospitality, and no doubt her home became the first Christian church in Macedonia. You see how simple that is? One little lady of all things. That's so sweet. So, there's also an incident that occurred in Philippi, and this ultimately forced Paul and his companions to leave the city. Ooh. There was a certain slave girl. Do you remember this story? And she had the gift of clairvoyance. She sees them and becomes like their groupie. She attaches herself to them, And for several days, she follows them around the city, loudly proclaiming, quote, "These men are servants of the Most High God. They will make known to you a way of salvation." And you can read about that in Acts 16:17. Okay, so you're thinking, well, that's a good thing, right? It's kind of like your free advertising. It's like the ice cream truck song. Everybody will come to the Lord. Well, Paul, however, discerned this girl to be possessed. What they did not need right now was an evil spirit running around testifying to their mission and the worth of the gospel. Paul, annoyed by this unwanted endorsement through this medium, turns around and, quote, said to the spirit, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you, come out of her." There and then, the spirit left her, from Acts 16:18. Well, with that exorcism, what happened? Of course, the spirit came out of her, didn't it? So, the girl lost her gift of clairvoyance. The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. And Paul could do that too. So this gift, as you see, had profited her owners. And they were making big bucks off of this. They became incensed over this exorcism, and they denounced Paul and Silas before the local authorities as being troublemakers now. They complained to the authorities, quote, "These men are agitators, disturbing the peace of the city. Furthermore, they are Jews, which means they advocate customs which are unlawful for us Romans to adopt or practice," in Acts 16:20 through 21. So let's think about that for a minute. Doesn't it take the Holy Spirit to make a proclamation like that? Why would she be possessed? Well, understand that demons are very clever, and they have a way of taking what looks like truth or is truth and twisting it for perverse means. That's the coming in sheep's clothing part of being a wolf. And they're going about thwarting the plans of the apostles because they're kind of going along trying to stay out of trouble. Last thing they need is somebody announcing that they're breaking the law, running around evangelizing. So the demons know this, but they have the appearance of looking like, hey, we're just proclaiming the Lord, no trouble coming out of us, right? Well, we're going to learn more about that eventually. You got to understand that having gifts are not necessarily signs of being a good Christian. Just because you have the gift of tongues, or prophecy, or healing, or you can do signs and wonders. Guess what? Satan can give gifts to people too and simulate those things and give them all kinds of little consolations and encourage them to puff up their egos. And guess what? You could be doing things that you're thinking are in the name of the Lord, and you're doing them against the Lord with the power of Antichrist in you. So these are things you got to watch for. You can't always go because somebody can do this or that they're holy people. You've got to understand who are they really working for and what fruits are being reflected in their lives. So you will know them by their fruits. So always keep that in mind. This accusation insinuated the anti-Semitic view that they had in the area. So we get the impression that that was going on there. And under Roman law, understand that Jews could practice their religion in Roman cities, but they were forbidden to publicly proselytize. So this demon was trying to get them busted. This is one reason Paul preferred to spread the gospel through the synagogues. That was the other reason. Under the Roman law, Christian evangelists were considered criminals perpetrating civil disobedience. For this reason, it was really important that the Christian religion remained under the umbrella of Judaism for as long as possible. Did you know that? And that's why it's so interesting that when Jesus came, he came to redeem the lost sheep of Israel. He came to the Jews. And remember how the Gentiles would come to him They had to show some extreme faith and commitment. The centurion, remember how strong his faith was? And remember that Gentile lady that came up begging at his feet with well, even the dogs will eat the scraps that fall from the master's table, because he came to the house of Israel. That was part of the salvation plan, because those Gentiles, God already knew they were going to suck this right up. Coming from paganism, finding how all those little fake gods sitting around, the little idols, weren't doing much for you, you're kind of ready for the truth, aren't you? Yeah, what a letdown paganism was. So the public accusations stirred up a civil crowd against Paul and Silas. So here we go. As a result, the city magistrates come along, grab them, cuff them, and order them to be stripped. Not just with your clothes on, folks. You have to be humiliated too. So stripped and flogged and imprisoned. So this unfortunate occurrence placed Paul in a position to do something very interesting. Notice how God always takes a bad thing and something good comes out of it. So he ends up in jail. What does he do in there? He converts his jailer, right? And the guy's whole family goes with it. You just know if you're in the presence of Paul, you're going to get converted. I mean, how could you say no to that kind of power of spirit? Also, he has this wonderful moment of satisfaction before the city fathers. You gotta love how God turns things around. They themselves now had seriously violated Roman law by flogging 2 Roman citizens without a formal trial. Ooh, busted. So, the accused, Paul and Silas, now, by no fault of their own, become the accusers, just by what happened to them. The alarmed city fathers hastened to apologize. They come groveling back. Oh, we're so sorry. And they plead with Paul and Silas, hey, do you think you guys could just leave town maybe, go away? We just want to preserve civil peace. So now not only are they released, they're sent off. Well, God has a way of getting things done. That's how they know where to go, I suppose. And of course, they obliged, but before leaving town, we read in Acts 16:40, the 2 first made their way to Lydia's house, where they saw and encouraged the brothers. Afterward, they departed. So, this ends the we section of Acts for a while, and apparently, Paul looks like he leaves Luke in Philippi to assist with this newly established church. The minute you took off, didn't have anybody there, it was always like all heck was breaking loose. So he left Luke there. And Paul learned from the Galatian experience the danger of leaving an immature church unattended. So just like anybody else, he learns as he goes, and he gets better at it. It's not like God just plops all the information into your head, how to do everything, all the prudence you need, all the strategic planning. You've got to actually figure it out as you go and use our brains. Now, Paul in Thessalonica. Paul, Silas, and Timothy now head west. And they traveled the Via Egnatia, a magnificent Roman road that ran from Dyrrhachium on the Adriatic Sea to Constantinople on the Black Sea. And there's our map again. It's a major artery that connected the west to the east. And such Roman roads not only greatly facilitated travel, but they contributed largely to the preservation of Pax Romana. You know what that is, right? Pax, peace. The Roman peace, Pax Romana, throughout the empire. Over such roads, Roman troops could be easily and quickly dispatched from one place to another. So it had military usage. So traveling some 92 miles along the Via Egnatia, the apostles came to the important trading city of Thessalonica. And like I said today, it is known as Salonica. And approaching Thessalonica, they could see on the far horizon to the south the cloudy heights of Mount Olympus. Once the imaginary home of the gods, Mount Olympus now housed only snow and ice. Blessed by nature with a fine harbor, this site had long supported a city. 600 years earlier, Herodotus spoke of it as Thermae, and Thermae means the hot springs. So apparently it had some natural hot springs there. Here, Xerxes, the Persian, established a naval base for the conquest of Europe. And in 314 BC, Cassander, a general of Alexander the Great, who we had just mentioned, rebuilt the city, and he renamed it after his wife. Of course, his wife's name then was Thessalonica. This was the half-sister of Alexander, so they all kind of have all this interbreeding going on. So annexed by the Romans in 146 BC, it became the capital of Macedonia, a Roman province comprising the northern part of Greece. In the civil war following the death of Julius Caesar, the citizens supported Octavius at the Battle of Philippi. And consequently, Thessalonica became a free city, and it had its own municipal government. When the apostles arrived in Thessalonica around 51 AD, by that time it was the largest city in Greece and the seat of the Roman proconsul. So that wraps us up for today. I hope that gives you a little bit of a background. We'll have some more to follow up so you have a real good idea of the area, the people, the culture that we're dealing with. So to come, here's another map. Tune in next week for drastic changes of epic proportions that are about to unleash. Cultures are being realigned to set the stage for a convulsive experience on an unprecedented scale. Are you ready for that? Yes, it's good to know. Notice the flashing arrows. That means something big is going to happen. Okay, so let's look at some of the details of what we have to come. And there's Paul and Silas as they're kind of creeping off with an angry mob behind them. Doesn't that make sales? I mean, has anybody had to go door to door selling? Yeah. Ever? Is that the hardest thing in the world? Yeah. Imagine when those are your customers after you with clubs and whips and cursing at you. I mean, God bless them people. And I think, too, that you know how Jesus called fishermen of men? Well, if you're a salesperson, you've been out there being a fisherman of men, haven't you? In the hardest way. I would think today Jesus would be calling salespeople. He'd walk into some, Sam's shoe store. You've been a fisher of men buying shoes. I'm going to make you a fisher of men and women, not buying anything, coming to me. It would be kind of an interesting study, wouldn't it? So let's look at what we have in detail. How exactly did Paul make ends meet? Being that one church was helping to support him, what else did he do? Why would people who didn't know Paul riot about him? What's up with that? 3, what serious crimes was Paul actually accused of? And 4, who opened his home to Paul and at what expense? Somebody paid a dear price. 5, what were early Christians vulnerable to? And 6, what was the only protection they had, aside from the Lord Jesus Christ, of course, and all the angels and the powers of heaven? 7, what was the city official Gallio's view of Paul? I heard applause over there. I don't think that was the case. What did Paul's adversaries follow him to do? That was fun. And 9, why would Paul go it alone in Athens? Big place. I think you'd need some help. And 10, why would lovely Athens make Paul so depressed? Most people who would travel there would be very happy. Bumped him out. We're going to find out all about why. And finally, what major doctrine was misunderstood by many? Those are always good ones. And are they misunderstood today? So that wraps us up for today, and you got a good start now, so study hard, look at your maps, look at this, and if you need one, let me know. I can also put it back up on the screen if anybody wants to see it. So thank you very much. Yeah.